Hi, it's Tim Hagen from Progress Coaching, and welcome to another episode of Coaching Conversations. And I wanted to make you aware of something very cool that we're doing on a subscription basis, and we'll put a link in each one of our episodes. But every Wednesday, we're going to be doing what we call an audio podcast workshop. That workshop will be roughly about 14 to maybe 20 minutes per episode, with each month having a theme from a coaching model, using feedback strategically, to coaching self-awareness, and so on. So if you could look in the body or in the content description of each episode, and you will see a link where you can join this subscription. These are literally 4 workshops every month teaching specific strategies to address a particular area of workplace coaching as it relates, again, to things like awareness, motivation, teamwork, and what have you. Here's the cool thing. It's only $10 per month, and each month you will get a handout that we will follow along with. So we also give you a tool for you to take notes as we go through each episode. We hope you'll check it out. Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm good, Tim. How are you?
Good, good. How's work going?
It's going pretty good. Having a good week so far.
Awesome, awesome. What's going on this week?
Just got a couple of deadlines for the McGinty account, so we're working on that project, and they've got a grand opening next week, so we're trying to get that all tied up by Friday. And that's pretty much our focus for the week.
Okay, cool. A couple things I wanted to chat with you about, and I'm meeting with a lot of team members, and I think we all know that we're really busy, and I wanted to share a couple perspectives with you, and I wanted to give you some insight with your permission of where I think we have an opportunity not only to tighten the team, but also to do some individual development. And I'm wondering if you're kind of cool if I share a couple perspectives with you.
Yeah, anything to help develop the team for sure.
Okay, cool. You know, I think we all have an opportunity, myself included, certainly yourself, is to really develop, I even think, an increased cooperation, a greater sense of energetic attitude towards the team. And when you hear that, you know, what kind of resonates with you in terms of what you do well and where you potentially see yourself to have some opportunities to improve?
As far as an energetic team, I think I do a good job letting people know that I appreciate when they help me out, and when we work together as a team. I think we do a good job, and we put out a good product, especially when we're working together.
Where do you feel like you have some opportunities to improve?
I think all of us could improve in how we communicate with each other. You know, I think sometimes we get caught up in what we're doing, and the communication doesn't happen, so the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and that can be an issue from time to time.
What are some of the results of that when the communication goes awry?
Well, frustration for sure. Also, I mean, it could lead to missed deadlines, which is absolutely critical. So as long as everybody knows what everybody else is doing, it's okay. But when people aren't communicating, things can get pretty crazy.
So when you talk about frustrations and potentially deadlines being missed, where have you personally kind of experienced that, or maybe even contributed to, for lack of a better description, some of the things going awry?
Well, a perfect example would be a couple of months ago. We were working on a grand opening, and we weren't communicating, so we got to the end product. We got to the actual event, and the caterers thought the program started 2 hours later, so there wasn't any communication going on, and that was a big mishap for us.
So how did you react to it personally?
I was ticked off. I was told that everything was taken care of, but evidently there were some changes at the last minute that we didn't know about. So I was pretty upset.
Do you feel like that frustration or you feeling upset was visible to other people?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, that's actually kind of the reason I wanted to chat, and I wanted to share with you. And I really, first of all, Chris, appreciate your candor beyond belief, because I think when you have these conversations, when there is frustration and certainly there is stress, I think that there's that opportunity to almost kind of forget that we give off that message. And I love that you're so candid and so honest. And therein lies an opportunity, not just for the team, but you personally, and to maintain that level of cooperation, even in the most stressful times. So if you had to name one thing where you feel like, boy, Tim, if I got better in those situations, here's the one thing I would need to do to facilitate that. What comes to your mind?
Oh boy. I guess patience. Um, and I guess I could communicate better as well. I think we all can.
So when you say patience, what do you think you need to do to facilitate that?
Um, I don't know. I guess just maybe take a step back and think about the situation before reacting. Sometimes that probably would be a good thing for me to do. That way, I can communicate on a more rational level.
Okay. So when you react, how would, if you were watching yourself, how would you describe your reaction in those stressful times? Not how you feel, but how, if you were visibly watching yourself from a distance, which is kind of a weird question to ask, what do you think you would see?
Um, Someone that's trying to get the job done, but maybe in a manner that's not conducive to motivating others.
Okay. Well, here's the thing I'd love to do. I really appreciate um, your candor. I appreciate you willing to open up, and not just yourself, but certainly other people. I'm going to be meeting with, weekly for about 10, 12 minutes tops. And I'd love to get together and just kind of put a framework around this going forward for about 10 to 12 minutes a week, to get some visibility so I don't make assumptions of what you're going through, and certainly to have you share what's going on the front line so I don't make assumptions, which I think could be terribly unfair to you. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, well, I don't see why not.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit weird. I'd love to have you come in every week with a perspective to share, but a very specific perspective. One where you felt like during stressful times, you really felt like you communicated thoughtfully as a great teammate. And maybe one looking back where maybe some of that impatience kind of creeped in again. And I kind of want to look at both ends of the spectrum, so to speak, in terms of how you react, because I think that'll give you and I maybe a pattern that's going on. Maybe certain situations cause things, but that way we can have a really thoughtful conversation where we can share in the pursuit of handling those things better. Would that be all right with you?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So why don't we get together next Tuesday? If you're cool, I checked your calendar, let's say 110 to 125. Let's put that in our calendar. And every week, just come in with an example of where you felt like you really exemplified great communication as a teammate, a really thoughtful team mentality, and maybe one looking back where you felt like you missed the mark and potentially why. And that'll kind of serve us in terms of getting the next conversation off the dime. Cool?
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. We'll see you next Tuesday, 110, and come prepared with those two specific examples, and we'll continue to digest this and work on it.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Tim.
So everybody, what you just heard was an awareness conversation. Now, like anything, conversations are not about perfection. Conversations are about hopefully being in the moment authentically. And as you heard, the person that you were listening to was Chris Holcomb, who's one of our coaching strategists and business partners. You talked about, and he talked about, being ticked off, lacking patience, needing to take a step back. And if hopefully you noticed, I didn't try to win. I talked about other people. I was talking to other people because I wanted to be sensitive that he didn't feel singled out. Here's why. I'm just starting the conversation. A coaching conversation is a series of conversations woven together. Now, Chris, which will not be unlike your employees, was pretty candid. He was pretty open because deep down people know they go through these things. But if you heard in Chris's responses, he started to talk about the team and, people, I think people would see I'm trying to get the job done, and he kind of went back to the team, and people will be resistant. Chris, in his own way, demonstrated some resistance. The key in an awareness conversation is to do what? Build awareness and establish a coaching conversation. Hopefully you heard that was done somewhat well. Now, the next conversation we're about to go into is our first conversation, and this is where we're going to hear how we use learning projects to build accountability. If you notice at the end of the awareness conversation, what did I do? I asked Chris to come in with an example of where he positively demonstrated great communication as a thoughtful teammate, and maybe one looking back where he missed the mark. That's my framework to find out and see where Chris has an opportunity to improve. That's exactly why we use learning projects. The number one challenge with accountability that managers have is we typically ask people to be accountable. What you do with accountability is you facilitate it, and that's where the learning project will serve you well. So in the next session, what you're going to hear me do is start off the coaching conversation using that learning project. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Good, Tim. How are you?
Good, good. Really appreciated our conversation last week. And at the end, I asked you to come in with two specific examples. One where you felt like you really exhibited great teamwork and team-like attitude with thoughtful communication, and maybe one where you felt like you missed the mark looking back. So let's start off with the one where potentially you felt like you missed the mark. What comes to your mind?
Well, I had an interaction with Lon last week. We were trying to get a couple of different products put together for our release at the end of the week, and I was asking her why things were delayed and why we weren't hitting our deadline, and she kept kind of going around and around in circles, and I just needed an answer because we needed to get this thing straightened out. So I kind of cut her off and just said, "Hey, look, I need to know what's going on, and just tell me the situation." And it probably wasn't the best way to go about it. I got the information I needed, but I was a little bit abrupt.
How did she react?
She was a little bit angry. Because she wanted to explain herself, and I wouldn't really let her. I just needed to know what the end result was. I wasn't really interested in the story part.
Okay. How did things end between the two of you?
We figured it out, and we addressed the issue so that we put a rush order on another piece of the project, so we were able to catch up. But it was pretty tense.
Okay. So if you had to, in one word, describe where your relationship sits with her right now, what word comes to your mind and why?
Probably friction.
Okay. What are you going to do to potentially, for lack of a better description, de-friction that?
Well, that's the second example I have for the positive side.
Okay, cool.
I actually realized what I had done, and that I wasn't really following what we had talked about. So I went and approached her and apologized for being so short and wanting to get the project done so quickly and not listening to her full story. So I think she appreciated that, and we shook hands and everything. So it turned out okay. But yeah, so I apologized.
So I'm going to ask you kind of an assumptive question, whether fair or unfair. And I want you to answer quickly, and if you could, really, really honestly, which I don't anticipate any challenges with you. When was the last time you apologized to someone like that?
At work?
Yep.
Whew, I honestly don't know.
Okay. So in terms of your interaction with her and not hearing her story, and then ultimately turning what, quite frankly, Chris, I hope you take a step back and realize what you did. You turned what a lot of times people let just sit, which is a friction type of interaction. It just sits there. And my experience has always been friction doesn't dissipate, it grows. Silence gets louder. And the
Right.
fact that you went back and apologized, I think, is awesome. So, hearing that, what are you learning about yourself that you're committed to improving going forward?
I need to continue working on my patience. So I jumped the gun in that situation with Lon, and it came back to bite me. So I just need to take a step back and think through situations before I respond.
So when you think about patience, what do you think triggers your lack of impatience?
I want to get the job done. I want to make sure that things stay on track. It's all about the client, and last thing I want is something to get delayed and to mess up their part of the project.
So if I were to share with you a thought, I'm going to share a thought with you, And I want you to just react to it, because I do not disagree with you at all in terms of it's all about the client. I love your mentality. It is a unbelievable strength of yours. But I'm going to share the following concept with you. We can get things done successfully and at the same time at the expense of relationships. When you hear that, what goes through your mind?
Someone that just wants to bulldoze and get the job done and doesn't care about people's feelings.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I always go back, Chris, to something called perception over intent. I don't think it's your intent. What I love about your candor is you're certainly illustrating that could be part of the perception. So what I'd like to do is get together again next week, and I'd love to have you come back with 2 more examples. One that was positive, where you interacted and you were really thoughtful as a great teammate, and maybe another one where you lacked patience, but specifically what potentially triggered that lack of patience. And then at our next session, I'm going to introduce a strategy called journal-based coaching. And I'm going to introduce it, and I think it will help you mitigate some of those situations that might be coming up. So again, next week, why don't you come in with one example of very positive, team-like, positive attitude interaction, and maybe one looking back where you missed the opportunity again. And then this time, what potentially triggered that? Would that be cool?
Sure.
Awesome. Cool. So let's get back together again next Tuesday, 110 to 125. What I love about the things that you're doing, Chris, is your honesty. And I appreciate your candor. I appreciate everything that you're sharing. What I would share is where we have an opportunity together is pursuing this. And I can tell you that a lot of times when people hide behind, well, I'm just trying to get the job done, I don't hear that in you. What I hear is, I want to get the job done. That's my objective. But I'm also really aware that this might be coming at the expense of other people. So you may not feel this way. What I would share with you as a teammate is you're probably 50% of the way home to solving this issue. And I'm really excited about what we're doing together.
Cool. Me too.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Tim.
Now, what everybody hopefully heard was I really tried to stay in tune with what Chris was saying. And if you notice that one word, he used the word bulldoze. Now, what if I were to attack Chris and say, Chris, you kind of come off like you're bulldozing people? What do you think he would have done? He probably would have pushed back. He would have been resistant. Remember, we're just having conversations. The other thing is I used a technique where I share a statement and get a thought. It is a great questioning sequence. So Chris, I want to share a statement with you. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is a great approach to do what? Build awareness. So remember, we had an awareness conversation, but we just had our first coaching conversation using a learning project. So ultimately, I'm still building awareness. He admits he bulldozes. He admits he lacks in patience. Do you think that's going to be solved in the next 2 sessions? Consistently and thoughtfully and professionally, virtually all the time? Of course not. That's why we have to have a relentless pursuit. That's why when we coach people using the 4-step model, we typically have between 10 and 12 sessions. That's why you focus on one thing. Now, if the next week I were to talk to Chris about his written email communication and his presentation skills and his project management skills, he wouldn't have traction. It's too much. So again, we've accomplished 2 things so far. 1, an awareness conversation. 2, our first conversation using a learning project that facilitated ownership and accountability that was applied to the rightful owner, in this case, Chris. Now, what you're about to hear is the same type of questioning, the same type of use of a learning project, but I'm now going to implement an activity, the 3rd step in the 4-step model. And that activity is going to be twofold. I'm going to introduce journal-based coaching, but I'm also going to use Chris's calendar as an activity tool. So stay tuned. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Good, Tim. How you doing?
Good, good. As I did last week, I asked you to come in with an example of a positive interaction and one where you felt like you potentially missed the mark. where there might have been patience lacking. So let's start off with the one where potentially patience was lacking. Give me an example of what potentially occurred in the last week.
Well, we were trying to get everybody together for a staff meeting, and we already had 3 people that were showing up late, like 10 minutes, and I needed to get things moving, or at least help get everybody into the meeting room so that we can get things started and get back to our project. And it was taking a lot longer. We wasted about 20 minutes, and so I was just trying to corral everybody, and probably wasn't as diplomatic as I should have been, just getting everybody into the room.
So how was that? How was that demonstrated? Your potential lack of diplomacy.
Well, I was just running around going, "Hey, come on, we got to get this thing going. You're 10 minutes late," and just saying it out loud when I probably could have done it in private or just been a little more mellow about the situation.
Okay. How do you think people reacted to it?
They're like, "Oh God, here he goes again." But I was just trying to keep us on schedule.
Totally understand. So why were people late?
A couple of them were working on finishing an edit, but a couple of them were just coming back from break, and we're just kind of getting settled back in. So they were just taking their time.
Okay. So what's a positive interaction you've had over the last week?
We did have a celebration on Thursday because we did get the McGinty account all signed, sealed, and delivered. So we had a thing where we went around the room and recognized contributions, and so I was able to recognize Lon and talked about how things were a little bit rocky, but we worked things out, and the project got done, and a lot of it had to do with her perseverance and her troubleshooting. So it was kind of cool.
How did she react when you did that?
She was kind of speechless almost. So I think she was shocked.
Why?
Probably because it's the first time I've ever recognized her, not just in public, but in person.
Well, you know what's really interesting is you let me share something that just kind of came across my mind that I thought is really interesting. Is you said, I think she was shocked in that you recognized her, maybe because it's the first time, and I'm sure it's not, but let's just assume that it is for the sake of this conversation. And I think about your willingness to recognize people being late to the staff meeting. And I think about us as leaders, and I think about recognizing the good things that people do. And I think about the good things that we recognize also earn us trust and reception to the areas that we also need to recognize where they're not performing as well. Hearing that, where do you feel like you have a personal opportunity to grow?
I think just recognizing others and their contributions. I saw that the impact that it had on Lon. So I think if I continue doing that with other people, I can help build relationships and better communication too.
And how do you think that would help you also recognize people when they're late to staff meetings? How will that serve you well?
I don't know, just go on with the meeting. It's, I guess it can be disrespectful, but people have reasons why they might be late, and rather than disrupt everybody else, just go ahead and start the meeting and get things moving and catch people up at the end. It's not that big of a deal.
Okay, and what I'm also alluding to is when you recognize the good things that people do, you also, for lack of a better description, have earned the right to recognize that they're late. And I think if we only recognize the things that people are not doing as well, that can kind of wear on people. And so I want to share with you that that's a balance act that I think we all have an opportunity to improve. Mm-hmm. Hearing that, what goes through your mind?
It's definitely an area that I need to work in.
Okay.
I probably need to practice more with your help.
Okay. Well, let's do an activity. I want to do 2 things. The first thing I want to do is introduce you to something called journaling. Have you ever journaled before?
No.
So It's a little bit weird. It's where you write things down, you write down thoughts, you write down frustrations, you write down good things. And I want to structure it with you a little bit differently. First, I'd love to have you get a notebook, and every day I want you to write down 2 things that you observed that your teammates did well. And I'd like to have you bring that into every one of our conversations or chats that we have every week. And I want you to write down every single day 2 things that people do well. Number 2, I want you to write down a time that you were frustrated, potentially lacking patience, and you wrote it down before you reacted. So the trigger is when you're feeling that lack of patience, instead of verbalizing it, you're going to write it down. And I want you to just put that into a journal. And I think it'll be a great repository for us to share. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The second thing I'd like to do is let's look at your calendar for next week. And I want you to just take about a couple minutes and, for lack of a better description, dissect, observe, really view your calendar. And I want you to identify 1 to 2 potential stressful situations that might prompt you to lack patience. So take a look at your calendar and then educate me on what those might be.
Well, Wednesday we have a status meeting on a new account that we're trying to get a proposal ready for. So that could be a little bit tense if everybody doesn't have their piece of the project ready.
Okay.
That one, and then we also have a staff meeting again next week. So hopefully everyone will be on time, but that'll be an opportunity for me to look at my situation a little bit different this time.
Okay. So you have those scheduled in your calendar, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What I'd like to ask you to think about right now is what will you schedule before those events to mentally prepare yourself? What will you put into your calendar that will put you in a frame of mind to successfully engage in those events?
Like some time for myself, or
could be anything. It could be a coffee break. It could be watching a comedy show, whatever it takes. I'm wondering if you schedule things in your calendar to offset those things that might prompt that lack of patience.
No, I don't. I just kind of go from one meeting to the next.
There's a concept out in the field, Chris, that's really interesting called white space. And white space is where we give ourselves time. And I think with journaling and now looking at your calendar, which is a really robust schedule, let's start to put into your calendar 10-minute increments before those anticipated events that might be stressful, may not be, that you can actually put yourself in a good frame of mind. And when you schedule those 10-minute increments before those events, if time allows, and I hope it does, is to also think about how am I going to use the things in my journal to recognize people before those events. Hearing that, how do you think that will serve you well?
I'm willing to give it a try.
How do you think it'll serve you?
I think it'll keep me on track, keep me focused on the right things.
And I would also add, I think it'll help you start those events off positively and probably put you in a frame of mind that will be received well. So heaven forbid someone doesn't have their piece of the project done, you're going to be in a better place to have an audience that's receptive to your feedback. And I think that will really put you in a good position as a leader.
Cool.
Cool. Well, let's do this. Appreciate the conversation again. Appreciate your candor. Really appreciate your self-awareness. Let's get together again next week and come in again with another example of where you exhibited that great team-like attitude, and another where potentially you were lacking patience. This time, though, I want you to also bring in an example of where you offset some stressful reactions because you were in a proper frame of mind and maybe you used your journaling as a combination to kind of fend off that type of situation. Is that cool?
Sounds good.
Awesome. We will see you next week.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
Yep.
So what you heard, everybody, is I implemented an activity. I utilized journal-based coaching as an education piece. That was knowledge. I taught Chris what journaling was, and I framed out what I wanted him to journal. And then number two, we looked at his calendar. And you heard Chris say, I go from one meeting to the next meeting. And so what he's doing is he's reacting emotionally because he's not even giving himself time to think. So what you heard is I reacted to what he said. I didn't steer him. I didn't have a self-serving agenda where I wasn't listening to him. I reacted to what he was saying. So what I did not anticipate that Chris was going to bring up in our practice session is the fact that he goes from one meeting to the next. So immediately I thought, how do I use journal-based coaching along with his forecasting of what was coming up in his schedule? Then I implemented an idea. So remember, as a coach, we can suggest ideas. We can bring ideas together. And what I've done is I've stayed true to what I'm coaching to him to being a positive team player with a positive attitude. And I've structured the learning project to do what? To provide myself visibility as a coach to where he's having successes and where he's having some inhibiting type of circumstances. Every situation you're going to be able to coach to. What you'll find over time, if you keep the learning project constant, you will start to notice patterns. So what we've accomplished is an awareness conversation, a first conversation where we demonstrated the use of the learning project, a second coaching conversation where we demonstrated the implementation of an activity. If you are consistent with coaching and you're focused on one area, not 12 areas, one area, over time you're going to get traction. Now, what Chris demonstrated, and some of you might be thinking, well, he was really easy on Tim. What Chris is exhibiting is what you're typically going to hear, especially when you're prepared, when you're focused, you're ready with a couple questions. And I used a lot of open-ended questions. I used the word share. I used the word opportunity. When we use language, positive language, like we, share, opportunity, perspective, observation, I use permission-based questions. Not that I need them, but I want Chris to invite me in. Your employees will do the same thing, and it levels off the edge a lot of times versus when we take these rhetorical mandates and we tell people they have a terrible attitude. What do most people do? They get defensive. So again, we did an awareness conversation. Number two, we did a second conversation, which was our first conversation using a learning project. And then the last conversation was the implementation of using an activity. That's as simple as the 4-step coaching conversation model can be. I hope it helped.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Coaching Conversations by Tim Hagen and Progress Coaching. Now, our company is always coming out with new and innovative solutions to help leaders coach their employees. And recently, we just created a new service called Coach to You, where leaders can pick and choose topics and assign 7 to 21-day programs for employees to learn and, more importantly, apply actions and then reflect and share what they're going to do going forward as a result of the learning. It's called Coach to You. We're literally bringing coaching to your employees. If you're intrigued, we'll have a link in each one of our episodes where you can get more information. And again, thank you so much for listening to another episode.